Good morning, everyone. I think I can safely say good morning because I'm here on Eastern Standard Time, but I know we have people joining from other parts of the U.S. So thank you so much for joining. My name is Tarek Hafiz, and I am a co-founder and president of Legally Solutions. And today we're really excited to present on the topic of how to propel your CLM transformation journey. Now, everyone is familiar with CLM. That's why you're here. And we're not really going to talk about the CLM in terms of selection, in terms of artificial intelligence, in terms of the features of a CLM. We really want to focus today on the post-selection of a CLM. How do you make sure that your team is ready to implement the CLM? How do you ensure that you're properly training your team and doing whatever is required to get them using the CLM? User adoption and what's realistic. Change management is another area that we're going to be speaking today about. So again, very happy to have all of you here and joining from all over the US. And I know we have folks joining from other countries as well. Legally Solutions, this is a quick background. We are a alternative legal service provider. We've been around since 2005. And one of our key areas of focus is contract lifecycle management, both the consulting side as well as the implementation side of things. So CLM is certainly a big part of what we do. But beyond CLM, we're also involved in other areas such as contract review services, litigation support, compliance, and legal operations more generally. I'd like to just give you a few notes about the program. So here in Eastern Time, we are starting off at 11:30, and we are planning on being done in exactly 1 hour. So we will be wrapping up at 12:30 Eastern. We will be engaging in a conversation with our panelists, so I'm going to be introducing in a few moments here. And we would love for you to ask any questions that you have. We do have a Q&A chat bot enabled, and we just ask that you submit your questions on the Q&A chat bot or chat box, I'm sorry, and we will address as many questions as we can at the end of the program. So we're going to reserve the last 10 minutes to field the questions from the audience. And without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our panelists for this morning session. First and foremost, Jonathan Israel. Jonathan is head of legal ops at Black Knight Financial Services. And Black Knight Financial Services is a publicly traded company. They are a premier provider of innovative, high-performance software in the mortgage and home equity lending space. And they embarked on their CLM journey in 2020. And Jonathan was one of the key stakeholders, and it is one of the key stakeholders and leaders of the core team that has been involved in deployment of the CLM system. Jonathan has over 20 years of experience in legal operations, and he is joining us from sunny Florida. Thank you, Jonathan, for joining.
Thanks.
And we also have with us Jim O'Hare. Jim is a colleague of ours and a good friend. Jim is really a pioneer in the CLM space. He's been in the CLM industry for over 22 years. He's probably one of maybe a handful of people who can say that they've been involved in 400 plus CLM implementations. So Jim comes with a lot of experience on CLM implementations, and he's going to bring some of that knowledge to bear in today's webinar. Jim has worked with a number of CLM companies in the past, including IBM, Taurus, Conga, Syrian Labs, and he's definitely worked on projects involving many other CLM providers as well. We're not going to be focusing on any single CLM provider today, but talking more generally about how to propel your CLM transformation journey. So with that introduction, I'd like to go ahead and turn it to Jonathan. Jonathan, you've been a key stakeholder in Black Knight's CLM journey. Maybe just give us a quick overview about sort of your involvement. I know you came in after the CLM had already been selected, but sort of your, starting point in this journey, and kind of where Black Knight is right now, in their CLM implementation journey.
Sure. Yeah, thank you, TH, for having me. So Black Knight has been using a CLM system for about 18 months now. We started a CLM journey, or Black Knight started their CLM journey back in October of 2020, and has continued that implementation ever since. I joined Black Knight in September of 2021 as the legal operations manager, because when we first started the implementation, we did not have a legal operations function inside of Black Knight. All the legal operations was primarily being done by legal staff, in addition to their regular duties of negotiating contracts and agreements and managing the day-to-day workflows through the legal department. So I was brought in to help streamline some of those processes and take that load off the legal staff so they can get back to functioning on their day-to-day and then take over the CLM. So in Black Knight, in our legal team, we have about 35 staff, whose primary job is supporting the sales side of the organization. We do have some legal teams who support the internal management, like HR and procurement, but the majority of the legal staff is devoted to the sales side of the corporation. And that's where our CLM is really used, is moving those sales agreements, through the contracting phase, from agreement creation and drafting all the way through negotiation, execution, and then managing the life cycle of the agreements inside of the CLM. And so when I came in and took over the management of the CLM, we kind of did a top to bottom review of our CLM and how it was being used. And we wanted to focus on several areas of the CLM. One, to make sure that the system as it stood at that point in time was easy to use. Having lawyers being the primary users, you want to make sure it's as intuitive and easy for them to do, since they're generally not usually the most technical of folks. We ought to make sure that the screens that they're dealing with, the user interfaces, are as intuitive and easy for them to navigate as possible. We wanted to make sure that we could have standardized templates inside of the system so that they could easily create those agreements while they're working through the system. The ability to send out batch agreements. So if we're starting with a new client, we want to be able to send out an NDA, an MSA, and SOW all at once, rather than having to negotiate and create each one at a time and send them out one-off instances. Automate some of the workflows, handling the renewals and expirations inside of the system, have some of that automated so staff isn't having to take their time to go back in and manually manually renew or expire agreements inside of the system. And then also have a main central repository where all these agreements are stored and can easily be searched and found and reported on if we needed to do that as well. And then also wanted to look at integrations inside of our organization. Where could the CLM be extended to interact with maybe our CRM or other applications that the team is using inside of the company as a whole. And so when I came in, we, like I said, we already had a CLM in place, and was really trying to evaluate how was that CLM being used, where could it be improved upon. And in doing that evaluation, we did find several areas where the initial implementation of our system really didn't meet the needs of the team. Yeah, it was functioning, but it wasn't really functioning at its best ability that it could be, and there was definitely some room for improvement and cleanup. And so that's when we decided to go out and evaluate some vendors who could come in and assist us with improving those operations and efficiencies inside of the CLM system. Obviously we needed somebody who was familiar with the system that we were using, but then also had experience with integrating that system beyond just the CLM and then that's how we honed in on Jim and his team at CLM Gurus, who are now part of the Legalese family, was able to come in and try and help us evaluate our CLM system and identify the areas where we could improve and clean up the way it was operating.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for that. You talked about kind of coming in and already having a CLM in place and sort of doing that evaluation of, how's it working and is it going to get us to where we need to get to? How do how do you make sure that your team is also on the same page as you and ready for fully utilizing the CLM? Maybe talk a little bit about how do you prepare your team? When you got into the picture, and any thoughts around that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, really, it's a lot of one-on-one talking with the team members. How are they using the system day to day? Where are the deficiencies in the way the system is operating, and how can we improve upon that? And that's how we identified a couple of areas that were quick wins and easy fixes that were able to improve the way the system was being used by the team. Ongoing helping the team. We've developed training materials, and we have ongoing training sessions with the team to provide them overviews on how best to use the system when they're creating the agreements and moving the agreements through the workflow of the CLM system as a whole. And then we have, I have open office hours where they can always come and ask me any questions they may have on using the system, and I can help them one-on-one if need be.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier that you did engage a tech partner to help with sort of your implementation journey. Is that something that you felt was required kind of in your situation? Is this something that you'd recommend for others as well?
No, I would definitely recommend engaging a tech partner when possible. They have the experience and the expertise on using the CLM system. Most CLM systems these days are very customizable. You're not stuck with just the straight out of the box functionality. So bringing in a partner who's familiar with the system and how they can customize it to better meet your team's needs is very important. It's been very helpful to us and our team.
Cool. Thank you. Jim, I'd like to kind of get you into the conversation. I know that you talk a lot when you're consulting and advising clients on CLM implementation. You talk a lot about this concept of readiness, and Jonathan, touched upon it in terms of sort of having those one-on-one office hours or one-on-one meetings, open office hours, training. I'd love to kind of hear from you, Jim. What is readiness when it comes to CLM, and why is it so important? Because you seem to focus on that piece of it quite a bit.
Sure, and I wanted to say welcome to everybody who's joined the webinar. I really appreciate your time, and of course Jonathan's time as well. It's been a joy working with Jonathan over the last couple of years. So when you introduced me, you introduced this huge number of implementations that I've been a part of one way or another, and so over this journey, and my software journey actually started 36 years ago, and so I've had a lot of implementations under my belt of different kinds of software, and so through failure, in the early days, and issues, in terms of deploying software, especially when I was working with vendors, and I've worked with about 8 vendors, 8 CLM vendors, and through the trials and tribulations of some projects that I've been involved with, I started to kind of focus in on kind of what are the reasons why certain projects struggle and certain projects don't, and I started to see that for certain projects where the time is allocated to properly prepare the organization and the core team for the journey ahead, those projects tended to be more successful and had a better outcome at the end. So I started to come up with this idea of readiness, and it's not a some special unique thing that nobody else has thought of. It's just that I realized that if you do certain things to prepare for your CLM implementation journey, the likelihood is that there is going to be a stronger or better outcome. So the way I look at the CLM journey as a whole is you first need to prepare for your implementation journey, and that's kind of what I call readiness. You then take the implementation journey, and that's an area that we'll talk about in in future webinars. And then you need to sustain your CLM journey. So those are the three key areas, are how I break up a CLM implementation. Going to the preparing for the implementation journey, things like and these are simple things, right? These are things that are not hard to do. They just need to be done so that you are ready to transition into that taking the implementation journey. Things like deep diving into the SOW once it's signed, and establishing a core team and making sure that that core team clearly understands the context of the SOW and where the risks lie in that SOW. Every SOW contains a risk, right? And what I realized in the early days, or when I looked back at the early days of my of implementing software, the SOW was a document that was signed and never looked at again. And I could clearly track failures to a point where, okay, in this particular project, we didn't go over the SOW in detail. We didn't look at the client responsibilities, the vendor or the service provider responsibilities, the assumptions, and tie the appropriate risk to those, so that if you miss this, if you agree to a set of requirements meetings, as an example, and you don't attend those, or your people are not there, and that delays that process, that adds risk to the project. And I realized that by not establishing a proper program, through the start to the end of the project, and follow that program, and if things started to deviate or problems started to occur, stop and establish a path forward that contained the least amount of risk, with the project manager and the core team from the customer side. So things like making sure that your program management and daily project management tools are established right out of the gate, after reviewing the SOW, and making sure, again, as I mentioned, that the core team is properly selected and properly trained before you start entering into the actual taking of the implementation journey, that part where you're actually starting to do things like requirements gathering and design gathering and so forth. And I think that's an area where I'm working with a customer right now where they decided to put the core team through a training before we even entered the requirements process, and that's a critical readiness component, right? Educating the folks in the core team that are going to take the journey through requirements, through design, do build reviews with you, take part in UAT. If they have an education around what CLM is, what the system can do, you're going to get better requirements, and you're going to get better designs. So those are things that I kind of focus on, TH, and here at Legalese, because I'm kind of the leader of the CLM group here. We definitely focus on these things as we move forward into new projects.
Excellent. Jonathan, anything you wanted to add in terms of sort of what Jim mentioned, sort of understanding the SOW and putting the right players and pieces together to make sure that this deployment is going to be successful? Any final thoughts sort of on that before we move on to the next topic?
Yeah, no, I think those are great points. I know at Black Knight, in talking to our internal team, when we decided to move to the CLM that we have now and implement it, we identified in the legal team who were going to be the key players in the implementation, and that group went to the intensive admin trainings for the CLM system to learn everything they could about how to use the system. And then they were the ones who trained the rest of the legal team on how to use the system day to day. And so I think, that's definitely an important part is, train the trainers internally, teaching them how to use the system, how to manage the system. And, then the rest, they train the rest of the legal team. And then the legal team has somebody internal that they can turn to ask questions along the way as they use the system. One thing that I would say to caution yourselves about is to make sure that is it something that that internal team can handle in their day-to-day workload as well. You know, so once we implemented the system and everybody started using the system, you know, that internal team didn't really have the time resources to continue to improve the CLM system and to, you know, to fix those deficiencies that were identified after the initial implementation. The team just kind of had to work through them until I got there, and then engaged Jim and his team to come help us improve those and fix those areas.
Thank you. Yep, that makes a lot of sense. And Jonathan, just kind of on the same topic of readiness, you know, one of the challenges of any large scale software implementation is the multiple stakeholders and departments that'll be involved in a CLM implementation. You know, I'm assuming, you know, legal, of course, you mentioned sales, IT is going to have their say into the process, legal ops, procurement possibly as well. How did Black Knight identify, you know, which departments needed to be involved, and more importantly, you know, how did you bring them together to collaborate successfully?
Yeah. So luckily, you know, we already had kind of a formal contracting process in place. So a lot of those teams were already used to working with each other through the contract negotiation process. You know, obviously legal was obviously involved, sales was involved, IT had to be involved since we were going to be moving to a, you know, a hosted platform in the cloud. They had to be involved with how that was going to integrate with our systems and maintain adequate data security in place. And then, you know, finance and accounting was involved, because how was, you know, once these contracts were put into effect, you know, what kind of reports and information do they want out of the system to keep track of all the agreements as they go through the life cycle process. And then procurement was engaged, obviously, in the selection process of the CLM, but then also looking future casting, you know, how can we move possibly procurement into the CLM system to bring their agreements under that fold of the CLM as well.
Was there a clear leader in terms of the implementation? Did it sort of belong to one department?
Yeah, it was legal's project from start to finish,
Okay.
and still is. Yeah,
Still is. So you get all the blame as well as the credit if things go well.
we did. Yeah, we get both sides.
Both sides. All right. Jim, any thoughts on kind of the challenges of working with multiple departments from your experience, or any advice on how to bring them together to collaborate?
Yeah, and it's a really good point. You know, some companies, you know, are able to be successful in a multi-department deployment, and some companies will struggle, and it usually generally comes down to personalities and you know, ownership, right? And so I think, you know, in Jonathan's case with Black Knight, you know, since, you know, legal absolutely owned the deployment, there was that ownership, and so that you could establish a kind of an organizational chain of command, if you will, so that as the other departments were brought into the core team, it was crystal clear, you know, where the ownership existed. I think also one of the things that you know, that I didn't mention in terms of the things that I try to do with a client in terms of readiness is establishing things like weekly status reports, you know, that are actual, you know, live, not just sending a status report and hoping somebody reads it, but actually getting together. But more importantly, and more important than that, from my perspective, is a steering committee, a group of stakeholders and sponsors that get together across departments, so that you can hash out issues that, you know, if IT for some reason is struggling with a particular concept or requirement or design element, and the, you know, the owning group is you know, is looking at it in a different way, and there's kind of a friction there that can be settled, you know, through a well-run steering committee, monthly steering committee. And so, I think that, taking those actions kind of helps in that, in that multi-department environment. I've been in, large projects with very large companies that produce phones and things like that, where multi-departments would literally fight each other during critical areas like requirements or design, and there would be a lot of friction. And so it came to that. Okay, the project manager owns the day-to-day activities of the project, and they need to be able to manage that friction between departments if it exists. But if it gets to a point where senior people are struggling and pointing fingers and so forth, then that's where the steering committee actually comes in, and we've had to use the steering committee many times in the past to mitigate some of that. But once you've got people on board, and again, going back to this readiness, if the departments, if the core team is built across the departments, and you have representatives, at the key representatives from each of these departments, or in a situation where a company has multiple legal entities. I worked with one large communications company that had over 50 legal entities, and so when we deployed over a number of years, all those legal entities needed to be pulled in. You need to have representatives from those key legal entities, departments, right out of the gate as part of your readiness plan, so that everybody is kind of on the same page, about what we're trying to achieve. And different departments are going to have different, needs, which is also a challenge. So then you need to start thinking about, okay, well, do we break up the project so that we focus on this group first, along with the associated legal entities or departments that work with them. And then in phase 2 or 3, we bring on procurement, as Jonathan was just mentioning, where they're not, procurement is a group that is likely to come on board with the CLM system in the very near future, but they're not yet there. And so breaking it, so it's a strategy to set when you're in readiness. It's something you want to make sure that you already have a plan for that as you're doing your selection and entering into kind of the readiness part of the project before you actually start jumping in and doing serious things like requirements and design.
Thank you, Jim. And I do want to talk a little bit about how to measure whether or not a CLM implementation is successful. But before I do that, I wanted to ask Jonathan to talk a little bit maybe about training. I know you touched upon it, but how important is training for your staff and for the different key stakeholders involved, through the implementation and production process? Anything that you'd recommend that maybe you guys did or maybe didn't do that you think would be helpful in hindsight from a training perspective?
Yeah, no, I mean, and just like in any system, the end user training is going to be very important. Without having your staff learn how to use the system and buy into it, the adoption is just not going to be there, and it's going to fall off and fail. For us, like I mentioned, we had the internal champions, I guess you'd call them, that we had trained on how to administer the system and how to manage the system, and then go out and train the staff on how to use the system. And then I went through the same trainings, and I do the training now internally for our legal staff on how to use the system, and then also with the sales team on how to get in there and find what the information that they need to find from within the system. Developing training materials, PowerPoints and other PDFs that we can send out to the staff for them to reference, and having regular updates. The CLM system is constantly evolving and changing, whether it's a product update from the vendor itself or just changes that we're making to improve the workflows and processes in there. And so just making sure that everybody internally is aware of those changes. Why are they happening? What is it that we're changing, and how are they going to utilize those changes to their advantage?
Got it. Um, so Jim, I wanted to switch gears a little bit, and maybe kind of talk about what probably a lot of the audience here is wondering is, um, you know, a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of effort is put into adopting a CLM. Um, how do you measure the success of a CLM implementation? Are there certain ROI metrics that you can look at to be able to, you know, I guess demonstrate to the broader organization the success of the implementation?
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, it's actually pretty straightforward and pretty easy. If you can positively impact a person's workday, you've been successful. And so I guess the goal would be, okay, well, if you've been able to positively impact the way that somebody performs their job on a daily basis, they're going to be happier, and the overall program is going to be a success, and the company is going to be better off for it. The question is, how do you measure that? And so analysts have have come up with ways to do that, and vendors promote ROI constantly. So I think it's what I try to do, and again I try to establish this during the readiness component of our implementations, is establish success criteria. You understand the challenges because that's why you bought the CLM system. But what you need to do on the flip side of that is establish really clear and concise success criteria. And you can break it down in multiple ways. I have one client that's looks at it, has established success criteria that focus on technical criteria versus organizational success criteria. Examples would be, the system responds, in a particular number of seconds to particular actions. So that would be more kind of technical success. Somebody is able to search for something, far quicker than they were ever able to before, and allowing people to do their own searches rather than having requests go to a contract team or a legal operations team. And you get an email saying, hey, go find this contract for me. Well, a CLM system should mitigate some of that. Organizational changes or success criteria would center more along the lines of, okay, within 60 days of go live, we will have 100% of our NDAs being pushed through the system. So we're going to have 80% adoption of these contract types, which are now active in the CLM system, after a 60-day period or a 90-day period. And then after 180 days, say, we're going to be at 90%. And so you establish these markers along your path, along your journey, and that establishes success, and it also allows you to look at kind of a return on investment. So some other things that I've used in the past with customers are how many renewals are we going to manage electronically or via the CLM system in the first 6 months. What is our goal? Is our goal to increase our renewal capability and our renewal accuracy by say 30 to 40% in the first 6 months? Do I want to get contracting to the cycle from request to execution? Do I want that to decrease by 50, 60%? And that was one that I actually used for a very large communications company, where the goal that I was given when I came in was, we need our contracting process to decrease by 60%. We also need review cycles and negotiation cycles to bypass legal as often as possible, because legal were very expensive resources. So those were kind of the key success criteria and requirements that I was given to start a project, and we achieved we achieved them, came close to achieving them, and that saved millions of dollars in contracting costs for this company in this particular division. By establishing this as the key element that they were going to hang success on, and focusing everything that we and the core team from that client did, focused in that area, and we were able to achieve it. So if you establish these kinds of things back in the readiness component, then you know what you're trying to achieve. You know what you're trying to build the system to do, and in most cases you'll be successful at it if you've got that laser focus.
Yeah.
Oh, I hope that answers the question.
No, thank you. It does, and I thought it was funny that one of the criteria could be minimizing the time that lawyers are reviewing contracts. So you want to automate things as much as possible and take the expensive lawyers out of the picture. And I say that as a lawyer myself. So, Jonathan, turning to you, I mean, you mentioned that Black Knight embarked on this process back in October 2020, thereabouts. You're a few years in now into the process. Would you maybe give us kind of your thoughts on where you are on your journey? Has it, have you recognized some of those success metrics that you had set out to achieve, back in 2020 at this point?
Yeah, definitely. I think the CLM system as a whole has been a success, even though we've had a few challenges along the way and continue to address and optimize the system as best we can. But I think, our entire legal team is using the system for all our agreements. They all go through the CLM to date. Internally, our legal team has certain SLAs that we've set for meeting, with our sales teams. We had an SLA of getting contracts back within 4 days, and we're well below that. We're at 2.5 days, I think, of getting contracts to the system and back to the sales team. So it's definitely been a success, from our standpoint. And then, as we've called throughout this webinar, we've called the CLM journey, which I think it's just that's the best term for it, because it is really a journey. It's not just implement the CLM and then let it go and it's good to go from there. It's a constantly evolving process that you just need to keep reviewing and making sure it's still meeting your team's needs and how you can continue to improve upon it.
And what's next for you in terms of, are you looking at bringing on more people on the tool? I know sales was a big focus of the deployment. Are there other departments you're looking to bring on?
Yes, so we think as we look towards the future, we definitely look at the procurement side of the house. How can we bring those agreements into a CLM system? And then, possibly the internal management, like staffing, HR type agreements, bring those into the CLM as well, possibly down the road. But then also looking at, what other integrations can we perform, with other applications in the organization, whether it's with the sales CRM systems or, with Workday for finance and accounting and HR management as well.
Great. Jim, I wanted to turn it back to you just a little bit about a pivot here, kind of connected to the concept of readiness. We hear oftentimes that a lot of money and effort is being put into a CLM, but the user adoption isn't there. And obviously one of the key success metrics might be 100% user adoption within a certain department. One of the things that I know you talk a lot about and think about is change management, successful change management. How do you ensure that the folks who are supposed to be using the system are actually going to use it and are psychologically, I guess, ready for it and physically actually using the system? Can you give us some thoughts on change management and how do you ensure change management within an organization?
Sure. And the organization needs to be open-minded and accepting of change management. That's like item number one. I have worked on projects where the idea of formalizing the concept of change management was just not something the company was ready to do. It almost seemed as if the leadership looked at me coming in and promoting this concept as overstepping, and so unfortunately in those cases there were issues and there were struggles. I think Jonathan has been talking about change management since we started this webinar. The training that they're doing, the continuous training that they're doing, the open office hours, the materials that they're creating. That's the sustainable part of your CLM journey. But it all starts back at change management for me, and again in kind of the readiness area. I look at an implementation broken up into 7 work streams is the way that I look at every CLM deployment now. It's kind of what I've learned over the 22 years. I think if the company doesn't have a change management group or a PMO that also supports change management, then we're here to assist that, and we generally have a program or a plan that focuses and helps the company focus on some key things. Organizational alignment, making sure that everybody is aligned with the CLM journey that's about to occur, and to help with organizational alignment is communication, and I'm fortunate to be working with a company right now that is just embraced change management and are doing just an incredible job in getting communications out to their folks, while we're way back at the beginning when we were in requirements and design, and communications continue to come out to prepare the team for UAT, and then there will be communications to prepare them for the education classes that will come around the production point, and then there's the sustained part, the sustainable part of the implementation journey. Training and education, as Jonathan has been speaking a lot about, that's a core component of change management as well. And so, communication, organizational alignment, education, leadership, making sure that the leadership is aligned. And I can't stress enough how important it is to make sure that the entire leadership component of your organization that will be impacted by this tool has bought in and is a champion for this change that's about to occur in the organization. So there are we have formal materials that have been fine-tuned for CLM specifically. I've used them from starting back at IBM days, and carried forward. Some clients have their own kind of model for change management, and I've worked to integrate our model into theirs. But it's really critical. Change management is one of the most important work streams from my perspective in the journey that you're going to take, and even if you're doing it more not focusing on a formal program, but just taking these concepts and using them and working around them in a less formal way is still a positive thing for your project.
And Jim, just as a follow-up on that, does change management ever stop, or does it kind of continue, forever?
Yeah, it's one of those work streams that never ends. And I think Jonathan would agree with me here. I mean, the idea that continued education, brown bags, open office hours, updated materials, the vendors update their systems, constantly. So you're going to have to engage with, updated educational materials, updated education brown bags to to announce how a new piece of functionality that a vendor is releasing is going to be integrated into your process. Change management is a never-ending thing. If you're going to own this system for 10 years, you're going to be doing change management for 10 years.
Thanks, Jim. I just wanted to remind the attendees that we are going to have a Q&A session in about 5 minutes. So if you do have any questions from the conversation today or otherwise, please go ahead and submit those questions on the Q&A. We've already gotten a couple in, but can probably field a few more. So feel free to go ahead and put your questions down. I'm going to sort of ask the final question to Jonathan. And Jonathan, again, you're sort of 2 years into this journey. Would love to hear from you. What are some key learnings that Black Knight has had as an organization, or has had as an organization through your journey? What would you perhaps done differently? Just any advice you can offer to the attendees here from your experience.
So from my experience and from what I've learned and talking to our internal staff, and that is really kind of start slow. Don't bite off more than you can chew at the beginning. I think that Black Knight had a unusual situation that the product that they were using at the time had reached its end of life, and they had to quickly pivot to a new solution. And so everything had to come over all at once. But I think if we were doing this journey, from beginning right now, I think it would start slow. Pick one process. Obviously, NDAs are an easy one to pick off right away. Bring that into the CLM system, refine that process as best you can, make sure it's meeting all of your team's needs and the organization's needs. And once that's up and running, then you can move on to the next stage, whether it's MSAs or another agreement type within the CLM system. But I would definitely go slow and not try and do it all, try and shoehorn everything into the system all at once and get it all up and running and think that you're going to be going from day one with a fully optimized CLM system, because that's not going to be the case. There'll be a lot of work to do after the fact and cleaning it up.
Did you feel like you had adequate support within your internal team, your tech partners? Anything you would do differently kind of with respect to that core team?
No, I think luckily we had a really strong internal core team. We talked about, or Jim mentioned about the internal, champions and the buy-in from management. I think that we've been really lucky that we've had really strong support and buy-in from our upper management from the beginning. Yeah, and we talked on earlier about the different teams that were involved in the CLM implementation, and who won that one. And luckily we had the buy-in from our upper management that said, no, sales or legal is going to win this one, and the CLM system is going to be the single source of truth for all the agreements in the organization going forward. So I think luckily we've had really strong support throughout the process from our upper management.
Awesome. Jim, any final thoughts from your end before we jump into the Q&A session?
Yeah, I think real quick, I think that it's important to understand for all of you who may be, entering your CLM journey at the beginning or are in the middle of a deployment or are in your sustainable part of the journey. I think it's really important to be patient, because this is a sophisticated tool, and it's changing very serious processes within your organization, and understanding that there's going to be a bit of rough water as you come out of UAT and production, and be willing to accept that and work as hard as possible to mitigate as much of those kind of rough waters as possible. That there is going to be good days and bad days as you come out of that first phase, and I'm sure Jonathan will agree with me on that. But as you continue to add to your kind of change management toolbox and you continue forward from that production phase, things are just going to get better and better and better as you move forward, and you'll get to the point where, as Jonathan mentioned, they've been able to collapse their cycle time down to 2.5 days. There'll be successes like that you can build on. So I guess I would just say, be patient as you start to come out of the implementation activities, formal activities into production.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Jim. So we are going to open it up for Q&A. So I already have a few questions here from the audience. Most of them are directed at you, Jonathan. So you're still on the hot seat here. Sorry. And then if anyone else has any questions, now is the time to go ahead and write those in. The first one I think might be an easy one. Jonathan, it's directed to you. Were you able to quantify the value of dropping the SLA on sales contracts to 2.5 days? You mentioned one of the key metrics was achieving that SLA.
Yeah, no, as I mentioned at the beginning, one of the important features of any CLM system is the ability to search and report on, the agreements in there and get some good data feedback from it. And luckily our system does have some good reporting capabilities. And so you're able to see what the cycle time report. So basically each step of the process that the agreement goes through, you can report on how long each stage is taking. You can show, where's the bottleneck? Is sales the bottleneck holding up the agreement, or is it stuck on sales waiting for them on a step of the process as well? And so we were able to show that the legal team was moving these agreements through, under the SLA that we had set for ourselves.
Awesome, thank you. Jonathan, another question directed at you with regards to training. Any general pointers on what worked well and what didn't work well with regards to training?
Yeah, that the hands-on, one-on-one trainings that we hold with staff have probably been the best source for them. Working through them, having an open, feedback like this. Whether it's over video chat or actually in person, and you're going through it step by step. Being able to address the questions that they have. And then for us, or for myself, managing the system, the vendor has really good online training courses. And so I think that's important, in being able to stay abreast of, as they roll out these new features and enhancements to the systems, being able to go on to their training sessions and stay up to date on what's coming down the road, and how to take it back to the office and help the staff use those new features.
Thank you for that. Somebody asked a question about your favorite cloud-based platforms for CLM, but I'm not going to ask. I'm not going to put any one of you on the spot there. So we'll if anyone's really interested in learning more about recommendations, we could take that offline. Here's a question for Jim. Jim, if you're in the CLM implementation process and you realize that your contract workflow, let's say with regards to NDAs, is not what you want it to be, it needs to be refined, should you sort of stop and work on getting that process corrected or refined the way you believe it needs to be refined, or do you kind of work through it with your CLM and kind of hope that things get better? So I guess the question is, if your process needs refining, should you first fix that, or should you just continue along the journey on the CLM implementation?
Yeah, I wouldn't. I think in my young days I would have just continued on and tried to reconcile that. As you move forward, because I was all gung ho to get to the production point and so forth. But now that I'm older, I understand that when you find something like that, when you find a process that is not working the way that you thought it was going to work during design, and even through the review cycles of the build component of your implementation journey, you didn't necessarily catch it. When you will catch it is in UAT. Because that's when people are actually starting to work with the processes, and they're actually taking a contract from request through execution. And if we found that the NDA process and the NDA workflow was not going to achieve what we wanted it to, that would be a point where I would go to the steering committee and I would say, as your service provider, I recommend that we hold, fix the process, and then continue back on. since I break up a deployment into 7 work streams, that doesn't, if we find that particular kind of a situation, we can still continue on with some of the other work streams, especially change management, education, preparing for all of that. So it's not like the project comes to a complete, halt, but, you cannot let something that egregious go forward if you find it, which you should be able to find it during like the UAT process.
Thank you, Jim. Jonathan, here's a question for you. We talked about the different groups that need to collaborate, with respect to deploying a CLM. I guess in your experience, and not to get you in trouble, which group has proven to be the hardest group to adopt to the CLM system?
Yeah, probably the sales folks, to be honest.
Yeah.
They're used to they like their CRM system. They want to live in their CRM system, so they're constantly pushing for what integrations can we bring that they can just live in their CRM and not even have to go to the CLM to find the data they need. But the legal folks, I thought the legal folks were going to be the hardest ones when I first came in. Trying to teach lawyers and technology, the two don't always mix. But no, the once you show the attorneys the benefits of using the CLM and how it really can improve their day-to-day work, they've picked it up pretty quick.
Excellent, makes sense. We got time for maybe one last question. So, Jonathan, this question again is for you, but Jim, feel free to chime in. Did you plan the data migration process at Black Knight? And can you just give a few quick pointers on what's involved with migrating old contracts or data into the CLM?
Yeah, so the initial migration I was not part of. That was before my time, but I was part of a second migration that Jim's team actually helped us with, where we moved, through an acquisition. We acquired a company that came into the Black Knight fold, and we had to migrate their agreements into our CLM system. And so Jim's team was instrumental in getting that work done for us. They came in and reviewed the existing agreements, where they lived in their system, how are we going to export them out of there, and then properly import them into our existing CLM system and maintain the data integrity as we migrated those agreements over. But yeah, I was involved in that part of the project but Jim's team actually did all the heavy lifting with that one.
Yeah, I think data migration, wow, that's a whole separate webinar. And so I think in the 3 minutes, that are left, the data migration is generally going to be the longest path through your project. So all of the other work streams that are going on, data migration is going to literally be the longest path through. And it's likely that you will not be at the point that you feel you need to be at go live. So that data migration may have a tail past the production point. So don't be surprised at that. Don't feel that it's a highly negative thing, because it happens in a lot of cases. And holding your project production date to sink in with that tail that may exist on the data migration is probably the wrong thing to do. So, but there is just so much around data migration that we can talk about, and hopefully our team will set up a webinar, specifically, focusing on that.
Awesome. Well, I think we are reaching the end. I just wanted to once again thank all the attendees who joined us from all across the U.S. and internationally. Thank you for giving up your lunch hour or whatever time slot that you took to come here. Jonathan, Israel, thank you so much. You've been really, really helpful, and I think just given the questions that were geared towards you, I think your experience and your perspective was very much appreciated. So thank you so much for your time. Jim, thank you again. You are definitely one of the most experienced folks that anyone could find on CLM implementation. So we really appreciate it. And I did forget to mention that Jim is the VP of our CLM services group at Legalese, and he also came from a leadership position as a founder of CLM Gurus. So Jim, thank you again for being part of this. We are going to be continuing educating on CLM transformation and implementation. We are planning a second webinar that's going to be held in Q2, and we will be in touch with all of you around the details of that webinar. And also the recording of this webinar will be made available to all the attendees. So if you, so we will be sending out an email after today and providing you a link to access the webinar from program. And again, we will be announcing a second webinar in the near future. Thank you once again. Have a great rest of your day and rest of your week. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone.
Very good.